Okay, we are gonna be making a super cute Peter Pan dress today because I am avoiding making my Captain Hook jacket, and this is gonna be way better. I always start off by checking off the pieces that I need, otherwise I miss some sometimes, and then I go through and check the ones that I've actually cut, and it's really cut down on the amount of times I've missed a pattern piece. I start by making a large cut around the piece that I need to get it separated from the rest of the tissue paper. This does add an additional cutting step, but it really helps me get more precise when I'm cutting the piece out, and I do recommend it. So you do precision afterwards, and then you got your good little piece that you need, and then you can move on to your next one. Checking it off, not gonna miss anything. And we go to our next piece. Snip, snip, snip all the way around. Don't cut your scissors. And then we do our more precise cut. And you just keep doing this over and over and over until you have all your pieces. Luckily, this dress actually didn't have that many pieces compared to some things I've made, so that was really nice. I liked it. And then it's time to cut out the fabric, which means my sewing machine needs to get out of the way. Now, I was so lucky. This skirt is literally just the width of these smaller width fabrics, the printed ones, and that is phenomenal. It is going to include the little white edge that is the descriptor of the fabric, but because it'll be in the seam, I'm really not too concerned about it. And honestly, if it had been a little too big, because the skirt has so many gathers, I could have had it be a little bit thinner. It just might have lost a tiny bit of its poof, but not enough for it to be a huge concern. So once it's pinned, you cut away what you don't need, and then you move on to the next piece. Now, these I decided to not be smart and not read, because you actually only need one of each. And I'm clearly cutting out two. Luckily, I only did this for this one back piece. I figured it out for the front piece, so I only wasted a little bit of fabric, and I ended up using that bit of fabric to make a mask later anyway, so it was all fine. And we move on to the front piece, where clearly here I've figured out only cut out one. Plus, it was too wide for the way the fabric was folded before, so it had to be cut out like this anyways, and that worked out quite nice. It was a really awkward piece to cut out though, because of like all the excess fabric that kept wanting to fall off my table. I did not enjoy it. I can't do the big wide cut around this like I can do a tissue paper because I don't want to waste fabric. And then the top pieces both had lining, so it was time to get those cut out. Also, just one piece each, which was nice. This was actually a white that I used to make a Regency dress a very long time ago that I still have a decent amount left. I doubt I will be making a pure white Regency dress again, so I'm okay to use it for some lining, and maybe one day I'll line a Regency dress with it. The top has lining, so it did not need to be serged, but our bottom did, so I started on that next, and you can see the white border that will be remaining on these pieces. So people who see me wearing it won't know, but you all get to know that there's a white border inside my dress. You've got the insider information. And then it was finally time to actually start sewing. So our top pieces have darts. That's what I worked on first. I used one of my air dry markers to mark off the edges and all the dots for the darts. I used to be a lot more loosey-goosey with my darts, which was a very bad idea. I don't recommend it. I then have a little triangle, straight edge thing, whatever, where I actually draw out the lines to make sure things line up properly later. I just want these to look as good as they can, especially because they're on the front of the dress. It's very prominent. And then it's time to sew them into little triangles. How exciting! We are darting! Woohoo! There was also a gathering stitch on the upper shoulder edge of the front piece, so I did that next. It's going to give it cute little gathers, and I'm excited about that. And then it was time to repeat the exact same process with the back piece, except for the shoulder gathers. There's only shoulder gathers on the front, so we were just doing our fun darts. I really do recommend these air dried pens. They don't work on every fabric, but they make your life so much easier. Then it was time to sew the front and the back together at this side seam. Very, very easy seam to pin and sew. No issues, no complaints. Here we go. Look at it feeding through beautifully. Amazing. Do your back stitch. And then it was time to sew some skirt pieces together. Wow, we're moving quickly along this dress. It's not difficult to make at all. I super recommend it. So you just make one big giant square, except for on one side you leave a portion of it open, as that's where the zipper is gonna go. And then we sew it with our 5/8 seam once again, and as you can see, the white is perfectly in the seam, which means we will have no issues later on. I would have been upset if it turned out that it was wider than I thought and it peeked through, but we were okay. And then it's time to make the gathering lines. You do it in 2 sections and 2 lines each in each section at your longest stitch length. I once tried to make a very large skirt with 1 continuous line. Very bad idea. It will snap. Don't do that. Gathering lines do take up so much of your thread, but you know what? It is what it is. And then it was time to start gathering so we can get this bad boy fitted to our bodice. Be gentle, go slowly. If you tug too hard, you are just gonna snap your threads and you're gonna have to start all over again. Take the time to make it work. And then pin to your piece, which for me is a bodice, and adjust as needed. Sometimes you do too many, sometimes you do too low. So just change it up, it doesn't hurt anything. Now we are sewing the top to the bottom through all of our gathers, which is always a stressor for me. I never want to accidentally catch something that is folded because I think it's a gather. Luckily, this worked out fine. I didn't really have to fight with it too much. And here is what we have accomplished after our first day of sewing. We've made a lot of progress. We've basically got a whole shell here up until the zipper. Usually I do invisible zippers, so this one was going to be a little bit different for me. It had a fold over to completely hide it. I was excited to try something new and hopefully remember how to do this. So we get it all pinned down and we sew in the one side. Beautiful. And then it's time to pin in the other side, which you make sure covers the first side just enough to hide your stitch line and the zipper. So I fiddled with my pins for quite a while before I finally sat down to sew. I find zippers just a very awkward thing to sew all the time, but this one actually turned out pretty nice for me. I was very excited. The zipper line has boning on either side to keep it nice and stiff, as well as keep it stiff under your arms, so that was next. You have to trim them to 5/8 and curve them so they don't stab, which is not fun. I don't love cutting plastic. And then it's time to pin it in along our zipper. You want to get it as close as you can to keep things stiff without actually obviously making your zipper impossible to open and close. So I pinned it down first. And then you take it to the machine and you sew it up on all 4 sides. I find sewing boning a little bit stressful because I don't want to sew through the actual boning. It's just, it'll go, it's just not great for it. And then once our boning in, it is time to work on the lining. So the lining has the same darts that we had on the front, so I'm drawing those and making our fun triangles. But it also has placement lines for boning, as you can see. So I had to get out my big triangle and draw those lines too. But first we sew in our triangles, just the same as the front, nothing special. Just working on white fabric instead of pattern fabric. Sew them, make them beautiful. Love a good triangle. And then once you have your darts, it's time to measure out what boning you need and do the same thing. Cut it out and then make your fun little curved top at 5/8. And then pin it down. This was a little easier to pin here than to the zipper. Then once again, you are going to sew it along your placement line, doing all 4 sides so it doesn't shift around or move. And then I moved on to the second piece of lining where once again I had to do the 2 darts and the 2 placement lines. Thank goodness for these little triangle tools. And we are measuring boning after finishing our darts once again. Trying to make sure I get exactly 5/8. Pinning them down, keeping them flat. I do iron my boning before I start working with it. It makes it flatter and less curved because they always come in a loop. Just be careful to make sure it's not too hot and you don't hold it in one place for too long. And then once the boning was in, it was time to do the same thing as we did with the front once again and sew the 2 sides together at the middle underseam. And then the big step, sewing the lining to the bodice. This one you had to go all along the top edge of the dress, and then a small section of essentially what is the sleeve hole to make sure you can turn it inside out. So here we go. I am taking care of the curved sleeve hole section first, and then doing the big massive top. And I even understitched. I try and skip this step a lot, but I really wanted this dress to be perfect, so I actually did it. Once you've got that sewn together, you are going to gather your front piece to match the lining and then sew that down in one continuous line. And here's where we finished for this day. Looks similar, but we've got our lining in, just not completely hand sewn down at the bottom. And our shoulders are together with our fun gathers. We just have to hand sew it closed. And our zipper's in, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. Oh my god. She's looking great. And we are back for some hand sewing. I was not excited for this part. I hate hand sewing, but it's gotta be done. So the shoulder went first. I quickly closed that up because it was the easiest part, and it was just nice to get it done and out of the way. I'm doing a slip stitch here. It doesn't take too long, I guess. It's just not fun. But it does what it needs to do without looking ugly, and that's what's important. And there it is. Look how nice that looks. Now, it was time to do the more daunting task of pinning down the entire bodice lining and hand sewing that. I finicked with the proper placement for a while I was pinning just to make it as perfect as I could. Remember to line up darts and seams and stuff like that as you are going. It's going to really help you. And then once it's all pinned, you just start hand sewing. Again, another slip stitch, same thing. This took honestly quite a while just because there's so much, and my fingers were so sore by the end. With all of that sewn down very neatly, I might add, it's time to do the hem. It wanted me to use hem tape, and I'm not entirely sure why. Because I serged it, I decided to just iron it over and sew it down, and that worked fine for me. The hem tape was confusing. And she is totally finished. I am so excited. I think this is the cutest fabric, the cutest dress. I would love to make other things with this dress pattern. It is lovely. I recommend it. And here it is on just a little bit so you guys can see how fun it is. Oh my god, I'm so happy. It's cute.